The humidity in the arena felt heavier than usual that night in Chicago, a city known for its volatility. Yet the energy inside the United Center had curdled into something uncomfortably stagnant. It was the main event of a pay-per-view that had, up until that point, failed to deliver on its promises. The crowd wasn't booing. They were existing in that dangerous, apathetic gray area that terrifies promoters more than vitriol ever could. In the center of the ring stood the champion, a man who had spent the last 3 years carrying the company on his back, his face battered and his eyes betraying a profound exhaustion. He was speaking, cutting a promo that felt like a resignation letter disguised as a victory lap, his voice cracking under the weight of a narrative that had run its course. The production crew dimmed the lights to hide the empty patches in the upper decks, creating a tunnel vision effect that only amplified the isolation of the figure in the ring. Paused, waiting for a reaction, for a chant, for anything to validate the sacrifice of his body. But the silence that stretched out was absolute. It wasn't respectful. It was the silence of a room waiting for permission to leave. The air conditioning hummed, a low mechanical drone that seemed louder than the 20,000 people present. Commentary had stopped trying to fill the dead air, realizing that speaking over this particular void would only highlight how disconnected the product had become from the pulse of the audience. The champion lowered the microphone, his hand trembling slightly, looking toward the entrance ramp not with anticipation, but with the weary look of a soldier who knows the war is lost but doesn't know how to go home. He dropped the belt to the canvas, thud that echoed through the arena speakers with jarring clarity. It was an unscripted moment, a breach of protocol that made the camera operators twitch nervously, zooming in too close, capturing the sweat dripping off his nose and the genuine fear in his eyes. The script had been discarded minutes ago, and now we were watching a mental collapse broadcast live to millions of homes. Then, the lights cut out completely. It wasn't the slick, programmed blackout of a spooky gimmick. It was a hard, jarring power failure that plunged the arena into a terrifying, abyssal darkness. The emergency lights didn't flicker on immediately. For 10 seconds, there was no sound, no light. Just the collective intake of breath from thousands of people realizing that control had been lost. When a single spotlight finally snapped on, it didn't hit the stage or the ring. It hit the crowd. Specifically, it illuminated a section near the barricade where security was frantically scrambling, pushing back against a surge of movement that wasn't coming from the fans, but from a hooded figure pushing through them. The atmosphere shifted instantly from boredom to a primal, vibrating anxiety. This wasn't part of the show. The movement was too jagged, the security guards too aggressive. The champion in the ring stepped back, his eyes widening, not in character, but in genuine confusion. The hum of the arena changed frequency, rising into a low, nervous rumble as the figure vaulted the barricade, landing on the ringside mats with a heavy, sickening thud that the ringside microphones picked up with zero distortion. There was no music. That was the first thing that registered as wrong, the complete absence of a carefully curated entrance theme designed to cue the audience on how to feel. Usually, the Titantron would flare to life, guiding the emotional response, but the screens remained dead. Black monoliths hanging over a scene that felt increasingly like a crime scene rather than a sporting event. The figure stood at ringside, the hood of a ragged sweatshirt pulled low, obscuring everything but the jagged rise and fall of their chest. They weren't posturing for the cameras. They were hyperventilating. The commentary team, usually so polished and quick with a catchphrase, remained silent. You could hear the shuffling of papers and a muffled, frantic whisper of cut the feed from a hot mic that shouldn't have been live. This audio bleed-through shattered the fourth wall, stripping away the polish of the broadcast and leaving the viewer with the raw, gritty texture of reality. The intruder slowly slid into the ring, not rolling under the bottom rope with the grace of an athlete, but crawling through the ropes with the desperate, clawing movements of someone escaping a burning building. When they stood up, the spotlight finally caught the face, and the sound that escaped the crowd wasn't a pop. It wasn't a cheer. It was a gasp of collective, sharp inhalation that sucked the oxygen out of the building. It was the sound of 20,000 people recognizing a ghost. The man standing there was thicker than we remembered, his skin pale and scarred, his hair wild and unkempt. He looked dangerous, not in the way a wrestler looks dangerous, but in the way a person with nothing left to lose looks dangerous. He stared at the champion, his eyes bloodshot and glassy. carrying a history that predated the current storylines, a history written in blood and betrayal on independent mats and in parking lots long before the bright lights of 2026. The champion's reactions sold the moment better than any scriptwriter could have hoped. He didn't drop into a fighting stance. He didn't sneer. He took a step back, his mouth slightly open, his hands dropping to his sides in a posture of utter vulnerability. The history between them didn't need a video package. It was etched into the terrified recognition on the champion's face. The intruder didn't speak. He simply reached into his pocket. The tension in that split second was excruciating. Security flinched. The front row recoiled. We have been conditioned by years of shock television to expect a weapon, a foreign object, a prop. Instead, he pulled out a crumpled, blood-stained wrist tape, the very same tape the champion used to wear when they were brothers in arms years ago. He dropped it at the champion's feet. It was a gesture so intimate and so loaded with specific, agonizing context that it felt voyeuristic to watch. The crowd remained hushed, afraid that making a sound would break the fragile, volatile reality unfolding before them. The physical altercation, when it finally arrived, was ugly. It lacked the choreography and the rhythmic give and take of a standard professional wrestling match. There were no lockups, no Irish whips, no playing to the hard cam. The intruder lunged, tackling the champion with a velocity that looked liable to break ribs. They hit the canvas not with a flat back bump, but with a chaotic tangle of limbs and a sickening crunch of bone on wood. It was a brawl in the truest sense of the word, desperate and sloppy. The champion, usually a master of technical precision, was reduced to flailing defense, trying to cover his face as fists rained down with a ferocity that bordered on criminal assault. The referee stood frozen in the corner, paralyzed by the indecision of whether to intervene in a segment that clearly wasn't in the run sheet. What made the scene truly disturbing was the lack of crowd heat. Usually, violence begets noise cheers, boos, chants a fight forever. But this violence was too personal, felt like walking in on a domestic dispute. The audience watched in a stun-locked silence, witnessing a purging of demons that had been festering for years. The intruder wasn't trying to win a match. He was trying to erase the last 5 years of his life. He dragged the champion by the hair. Screaming words at the ringside mics couldn't quite catch, but the vein bulging in his neck told the story. He threw the champion into the turnbuckle, not with a flat impact, but with a force that whipped the champion's head back, causing a legitimate cut to open up above the eye. Blood began to flow, dark and immediate, devoid of the theatricality of a blade job. This was accidental, messy, and real. The climax of the segment wasn't a finishing move. There was no signature slam. The intruder simply trapped the champion in a chokehold, a submission hold applied with malicious intent. The champion didn't tap out. He didn't flail. He just stared blankly at the lights, his eyes filling with tears, accepting the punishment as if he believed he deserved it. It was a moment of profound psychological storytelling where the physical pain was secondary to the emotional catharsis. The intruder squeezed, his own face contorted in anguish, weeping as he choked the man he once called a brother. A bell never rang. Security never successfully separated them. The screen simply faded to black, not with a copyright logo or a signature sign-off, but with abrupt, hard cut that left the image of the two men, locked in a violent, tragic embrace, burned into the retinas of millions. The feed cut to static, leaving the world in a state of suspended disbelief. The moment the live feed cut, the atmosphere backstage dissolved into absolute pandemonium. Frantic energy of the gorilla position, the nerve center of the show just behind the entrance curtain, is usually controlled chaos. But this was different. Headsets were thrown. Producers were screaming over Combs' lines that had gone dead. The executive in charge, a legend in his own right, sat staring at the monitors with a face drained of color. He hadn't authorized the segment to go that far. The physical boundaries had been crossed, and the legal implications were already racing through his mind. Writers who had spent weeks crafting storylines saw their work incinerated in 5 minutes of unscripted reality. The locker room, usually a place of camaraderie or petty squabbles, had fallen silent. Talent gathered around monitors, not as coworkers, but as fans, witnessing something that terrified them because it threatened the delicate illusion their entire industry was built upon. Rumors began to circulate immediately. Was it a shoot? Was the intruder actually under contract? Was the blood real? The lines between fiction and reality, which the business tries so hard to blur, had been completely erased. Security teams were escorting the intruder out of the building through a side exit, keeping him separated from the general roster to prevent a riot. The champion was being attended to by medical staff, refusing to speak, refusing to break character, or perhaps unable to find the character anymore. The paramedics wiped the blood from his brow, but the 1,000-yard stare remained. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost and realized the ghost was right. Outside the arena, the confusion was metastasizing. The crowd refused to leave. They lingered in the aisles, staring at the empty ring, waiting for an explanation that wasn't coming. The silence inside the arena had morphed into a low, buzzing hive of speculation. Phones lit up the darkness like fireflies as thousands of people refreshed social media, looking for answers. But the official accounts were silent. No tweets, no press releases, no YouTube clips. The blackout was total. This silence from the corporate machine only fueled the hysteria. By refusing to acknowledge the event, they validated its gravity. It wasn't a viral marketing campaign. It was a trauma response. The locker room sensed a shift in the tectonic plates of the industry. The safe, sanitized era of sports entertainment had just been violently murdered by a ghost from the past. And everyone knew that come Monday morning, the business would never be the same. In the days that followed, the internet didn't just break. It fundamentally changed how it consumed the product. The clip of the entrance, the silence, the hood, the heavy thud of boots on canvas was dissected frame by frame. Lip readers tried to decipher the screamed whispers. Body language experts analyzed the champion's fear. But amidst the noise and the millions of views, a deeper, more melancholic realization began to settle over the fan base. This wasn't excitement. This wasn't the thrill of a surprise return. It was sadness. The return didn't promise a dream match. It promised a tragedy. We realized that we weren't watching a hero return to conquer. We were watching a broken man return to burn down the house he helped build. The narrative repercussions were devastating. The championship belt, left abandoned in the ring, became a symbol of a dead era. The storylines involving other wrestlers felt suddenly trivial, plastic, and fake in comparison to the raw, ugly humanity we had just witnessed. The company tried to pivot, tried to spin it into a sanctioned angle, but the audience rejected the polish. They wanted the grit. They wanted the uncomfortable reality that the intruder had brought with him. Families of the wrestlers involved posted vague, worried updates, blurring the lines even further. Was the hatred real? Was the reconciliation possible? The return forced the audience to confront the cost of their entertainment, the broken bodies, the fractured psyches, the real people behind the superhero avatars. Ultimately, the entrance of 2026 wasn't defined by the pop, but by the silence. It was the moment the genre grew up, shedding its carnival skin to reveal the dark, beating heart underneath. The viewer is left with a single haunting question, one that lingers long after the browser tab is closed, when the lights go out and the crowd goes home, and the character is stripped away. How much of the man is actually left? We cheered for the return, hungry for the nostalgia, but as we watched the two men weep in the center of the ring, locked in a stranglehold of shared trauma, we were forced to ask ourselves if we were witnessing a wrestling match, or if we were simply bearing witness to two men drowning in plain sight. And for the first time in history, we were too ashamed to cheer.